Hello and welcome to Sheffield Live. My name is Baile Jallo and we are African Voices platform. Last week, the much anticipated Race Equality Commission report was finally published after nearly 2 years of investigation. The report urged key organizations in the city to come together to create a city that is anti-racist. You may remember this all started after the killing of George Floyd by 2 white police officers in the United States in 2020. His death caused anger and widespread demonstrations across the world, including here in Sheffield. As a result, the Race Equality Commission was set up by Sheffield City Council in order to tackle racism and also to try and solve some of the inequalities in the city. Our reporters, as Mohammed and Enoch Karimba, were at the event last week, and they spoke to some of the key stakeholders in the report, including Professor Kevin Hylton, the chair of the report, to get an understanding of their findings and some of their recommendations. Here is more from them.
It's a disrupting report, and when you disrupt things, then people tend to feel a bit uncomfortable. But sometimes you have to be uncomfortable to make some sort of productive progress. So that recognition of needing to look at how people do business and what they need to change in terms of race equality, racial inequalities, and identifying good practice is fantastic. I'm always skeptical, you know, I'm an academic, I'm critical. And so the big thing for me is what happens tomorrow. You know, when people wake up and they read the report again and they read it thoroughly and understand what they've got to do in relation to these findings, this evidence, and the recommendations. What does it mean for them? What does it mean for their employees? What does it mean for their customers? What does it mean for the city? And can the city, the local authority, the key anchors become actively anti-racist and become proactive rather than reactive where issues of race come to the fore?
What were some of the key issues that you found that you really had to highlight?
They go from conversations around how the kind of historical backdrops to race equality that include things like COVID, Black Lives Matter, austerity have influenced how people do business, how organisations do business. And we need to understand the pushes and pulls of those backdrops so that organisations aren't constantly affected by external influences. They need to have systems in place that are impervious to those external influences, that go from that through to issues around trust and confidence in the community with their key anchor organisations. There are issues around the quality of data, ethnicity data that's available, and the consistency in which data is collected and how data is used. And of course, there are very clear issues around diversity and around leadership and diversity and governance. You know, who are the board members? What are their ethnicities, and why is it we hemorrhage people from certain backgrounds as we move higher up the system?
I know you mentioned at the point of given the task to do this report, you did question it, obviously because of the time frame with the Black Lives Matter and so forth. Are you proud? Are you happy that it's gone ahead and you've taken part in this now? It's
an honour and a privilege to do meaningful work. I only choose to do work that I feel will make a difference. You won't see me engaged in any superficial, tokenistic work around equalities and social justice. I ensure that the final product is a product that I can be proud of and other people can be proud of. And I think you can see from the sorts of conversations we've had today that people recognise that a lot of work has gone into it, that it makes sense what's being said. They recognise the voices of people in the city as they read the narrative, and they understand where the recommendations have come from based on the findings. So yes, I'm very proud, but at the same time, you can't rest on your laurels with a project like this. You have to do a project like this, but the key thing is, and the change happens after a report like this is done.
How does one keep on top of this then, as you've just touched on, with making sure that things are being done? Because many years ago a similar report was done, and then we are here at this stage.
And one of the learnings from that was the need to ensure sustainability post the report, and the legacy conversations that we've been having today are about that very thing. You know, how do you ensure sustainable change? How do you monitor, check and challenge the key organisations in the city? And how do you make their work transparent across the city? These are ongoing conversations. At the very start, the legacy group, given what Councillor Mohammed was saying, the legacy group will be established for a minimum 5 years. This is a project that will not have an end point. So you can't say in 5 years we've done it, we've been successful in dealing with racism and racial inequalities in Sheffield. So there will be an ongoing rolling project of checking and challenging through the legacy group. So I'm very optimistic about the plans to go forward. But the key thing is, at some point the talking has got to stop and action has got to happen.
Just finally from me, Kevin, as an ethnic minority background individual that reads this report, how confident should they be?
As confident as they can be confident that a lot of rigour and a lot of time has gone into the report to reflect their experience, because often we can read things that don't really resonate with our lived experience of Sheffield. They should be able to get a very clear sense of that. I expect people to remain sceptical, and I want people to remain sceptical because that keeps people on their toes, and to watch this space in terms of what happens next, what are the plans for the legacy group, and what are individual organisations doing, regardless of whatever the legacy group does. They shouldn't wait for the legacy group to be established and to be told what to do. They have the report, they can get on with it now. So let's talk again in a year's time. Let's look at what's been achieved in a year, because you want new things to have happened rather than people recycling what they've done in the past and say somehow it's a response to the Race Equality Commission's recommendations, because I think we'll be able to see through that very quickly.
I think there's been a tremendous amount of work gone in it. The commissioners, all 24 commissioners, have worked extremely hard, but there's been lots of people outside of the commissioners. Really, this is the commission, the people who have given evidence, the witness statements, the organisations and individuals that have been involved as a city. Really, it's been a really it's not been an easy process. At times it's been quite traumatic. You know, you've been hearing about people's lived experiences, their experience of racism, discrimination, impact on their health, their housing, their education, their criminal justice system. So all of that, you know, the 12 hearings, the evidence, the lived experiences that people have shared. I think for me, the real question now is, what are we going to do as a city? I was just saying to you earlier, you know, in 1968, my father, Karimba, he was a commissioner on the Race Commission in 1968. That's nearly 50 years. And the question for us now is, are we going to let another generation go by where they're going to be looking back and going, well, what did you guys do? What did you change? And yes, there have been some improvements. Yes, things have changed for some communities. But actually, there's still a long way to go. And I suppose for me, I'm not thinking about myself, I'm thinking about those future generations, you know, those young people that are coming up behind us. What's going to be their experience, and how do we break that cycle of racism, discrimination, racial disparity, inequity? I want every young person, I want every person who's a citizen of Sheffield to feel that they've got a fair and inclusive access to opportunity, they've got a fair and inclusive opportunity to make something of their lives and be something, and, you know, achieve something for their lives. And for me, this report, the work has been done, but the work is not finished. The report is nothing more than saying, this is what we've found. The real work, the actual work starts now, and collectively what are we going to do as a city, not only just to respond to the report, but to respond to all those people in the community who shared their lived experiences with us. How are we going to hold ourselves accountable to those communities, those people, and say, you know what, we made a difference? And I'm not saying that that's going to happen overnight, I'm not saying that that's going to be an easy process, but I want to be able to stand in here in another generation and my young daughter or my young son, somebody else, you interviewing them in 5-10 years time, and them saying, I feel different.
Thank you for that. It's a report of its kind, especially from Sheffield. We've seen the recommendations. These recommendations, 6 of them, how sure do we know that these recommendations are going to be implemented? Will it be one of those reports that are going to be put back on the shelf and forgotten about?
I think that's where a collective and joint responsibility for scrutiny and accountability is going to be absolutely important. It's going to be absolutely vital. We've had many, many reports, local, regional, national, international reports about racism, disparity, all of that kind of stuff. The question is do we just go, right, report done, tick a box, the report was the work. The report is not the work. Whether we did this report or not is irrelevant. The disparities, the racial impact, all of that will still exist in Sheffield. The question now is, we've put a spotlight on it. We've put a spotlight on it in terms of the context of COVID, George Floyd, Black Lives Matters, all sorts of things. We're acutely aware of the impact of racism on individuals, communities, families, and as a city. So in regards to your question about how are we going to make sure those 7 recommendations, particularly the 6 recommendations, how are they going to be transparent and accountable? That's a collective responsibility where we've got to say, where has been the meaningful change? And the only way we're going to get meaningful change is if we hold people accountable, but we start with holding ourselves accountable.
Similar things happening again where people have not been held accountable, or will it be one of those processes where, drawing back on the reports and also the legacy focus group, I think that's been talked about, would that be a forum or a platform that might be able to bring things to fruition?
The Legacy Working Group is really about ensuring that there is some scrutiny and accountability in terms of tracking that journey of change. And in terms of the recommendations, this isn't just going to be a case of here's a report, let's put it on a shelf. This is about a living document. This is about ensuring that all people in Sheffield that are in a position of power, in a position of decision making, whether they're, whichever's private, public, VCF sector, whatever they are, it's about ensuring that we are going to those people and saying, how are you accountable? What are you doing to demonstrate? What is the demonstrable change? And the thing is, what this report has done is put a spotlight on Sheffield in a way that nobody can ignore it. Nobody in this city, after this report, can say, we didn't know. We weren't aware who the communities were. We don't know how to do community engagement. We don't know how to deal with XYZ case. We can't say that anymore. And I think now there's nowhere to hide. Yeah, and so if there's nowhere to hide, if everything's out in the open now it's about thinking about how do we meaningfully demonstrate to communities and this city that we are a anti-racist city and we have racial equity and fairness and inclusion for all our citizens.
It's
been really interesting to see this report being presented today. It's a big, thick, weighty report, and it's really important that people who are here today go away, read this properly, and then reread it, because there's a lot to really take in. In some ways, there's nothing new in here. There's a real problem with racism, and race inequality and racial disparities. They're different things. In some ways, that isn't new. But it is important that we refocus and do what we can as institutions to tackle those. Because what it really shows is just how entrenched the differences in treatment between different groups of people is. And it's really incumbent on all the anchor institutions in particular to really get to grips with this. And I say it's not new because 10 or 20 years ago, there was a lot of talk about equality duties, being proactive, about measuring, gathering data, and acting on it. And that's still the same message we're getting today. So that means that we still have a long way to go. And it's not that those initiatives in the past failed, it's just that there is more work to do.
Right. Obviously, they've talked about some of the recommendations. Do we see these recommendations actually ever put in consideration or in practice? I mean, will this be a report that might just end up on a shelf of someone's shelf? As you rightly mentioned, it's a big volume there, so I'm just, I'm a bit apprehensive and, just thinking that many a times these reports are commissioned, these reports are produced, but not much come to fruition. What's your observation on that?
That is exactly my concern. I'm always really worried about something like that because a lot of work's gone into this, and it would be a tragedy if it was just left on the shelf. I think what's really interesting, what's the most interesting thing today, is the commitment that's made today to have a working group that's going to go for 5 years. And that timescale is important because very often after reports such as there is a promise to have some sort of working group, and it meets for a bit and then it dwindles and the media loses interest and it just disappears and no one really knows what happens to it. But because there's a commitment of 5 years, it means that will keep it in the eye of the public and of the institutions that have to deal with this. And it means that it won't go away. So that I think is encouraging, and that's quite a clever step that's been put forward there. So I'm hopeful in that sense.
Thank you for that. As a sitter, what does this report mean to all of us?
Well, I think it is something that means that, A, we've got to take note of the fact that actually racism and racial difference is a big issue here. There is a huge amount of inequality that's embedded, and there is a need for action on it. It's not enough just to say that it's a bad problem. It's the actions that count, and I think what we're hearing is commitment from a lot of the bigger institutions that there will be action on that. And the details of exactly what that action is going to be have got to be worked up, and we've heard a commitment from the leader of the council today that he'll try and get that pushed through the new committee system to make sure that we do have a comprehensive plan of action to respond to that, and I'll certainly welcome that. And that has to be the case for all the institutions.
That's it from me and the rest of the team here. Thank you for watching, and do join us again next week if you can. Until then, thank you for watching, and you have a very good night.